matter what hour your clock strikes, here it's always Halloween. And I'm always your haunted host, Luce Tomlin-Brenner. Welcome to Small Frights Friday. On these episodes, I like to read a curated selection of letters from our EEEEKmail bag, and I play phone calls from our All Hallows Hotline. We love to hear from all of our listeners. Honestly, anything Halloween related, if you want to reply to anything on Instagram, anything from our history episodes, any questions that you want to answer that our listeners pose in these Small Frights episodes, please don't hesitate to call into the All Hallows Hotline. The number is 802-532-DEAD. Or write us an EEEEKmail at itsalwayshalloweenpodcast@gmail.com. We are back this week after a little bit of a vacation. I was very excited to see the EEEKmail and the voicemail box just overflowing with questions and memories and ideas. So we are going to dive into as many of those as we can today. Some of them will have to wait until next week or other future episodes, but don't worry. I am trying to get everybody's voice on these episodes, not trying to skip anybody. So if you haven't heard your question or memory yet, don't worry, you are on my radar. So let's jump right in today. We are going to start with an EEEKmail. And the subject line of this one is Halloween year-round. Hi, Luce. I'm so glad that there is now a podcast about Halloween that I can enjoy year-round. I run an Instagram for Halloween year-round, so I'm always interested in how others who love the holiday keep it going. What are some ways to incorporate Halloween into your life during the rest of the year? Thank you, Lindsay. And you guys can follow Lindsay's year-round Halloween Instagram at Trick or Treat Yourself 8, which is spelled TRICKORTreatyOurself 8. So I will, tag you, Lindsay, in the Instagram post so that everybody can go follow Lindsay and share what they like to do year round and get in on her really cool community that she has created over there. And I would also love to hear from people calling in as well about how they like to celebrate year round. I actually have a really great voicemail that I want to play that corresponds with this. Another listener wanted to get into this subject. So let's hear the voicemail and then have a full discussion on this topic.
Hi, Luce. This is Shanti. I'm calling from Oakland, and I'm part of the girl gang that includes Laura and Maricela, who have also called in previous episodes. And I have part question and also just part share about the transition for November as we come out of our peak Halloween time. And for those of us who follow pagan rituals and things like that, as I do, it's, the turning of the wheel and all of that into Yule time. And I am just wondering, for you and fellow listeners, what are the distinctions between all year round Halloween deco and the special extra potent Halloween season only decoration? And I think of this because I'm packing up my peak time Halloween decorations, and I'm realizing that for me the distinction is all things that are jack-o'-lantern and pumpkin and skulls start to get packed away in November, and the things that I keep out are my Frankenstein, or I should say Frankenstein's monster, and his bride type material, because I have a lot of imagery from that storyline, as it's one of my favorite Victorian pieces of literature and just sci-fi pieces of literature of all time. So I have a lot of pieces from my friends, and those stay out all year, but then pumpkins and lights and things like that get packed up, and there's an element to it that feels a little sad, where there's this feeling of like, oh, this most amazing time of year now is coming to a close, and I just long for a way to have there be festive energy in some way as I pack things up. So I'm wondering if you or anyone else have go-to movies or music or just any other element of making the transition time out of Halloween just as special, and if there are ways to honor coming out of it and closing it up, if that makes sense. Thank you so much for this incredible podcast, and I look forward to the episodes every single week. I really appreciate your whole perspective as you go through all of the research. All right, thanks again. Can't wait for the next episode.
Shanti, that was such an awesome call. Thank you so much for your kind words. I always love hearing from the girl gang, and I just want to thank you all again. I'm not sure who found it first, but I appreciate that one of you discovered this podcast and then shared it with all your best friends, and I think it's so fun. A lot of my close friends are back in Ohio, where I'm from, and podcasts are definitely a way that we get to stay close and, talk about a topic that we love, is when we get to listen to podcasts together. So I'm glad that you guys have this one. And please, other listeners, share with your friends. Word of mouth is the way that podcasts grow. So I thought this was a really lovely message, and I really appreciate you and Lindsay and so many of our listeners that do really cherish the holiday in a way where you want to keep it going all year round. But then I know you also recognize the inability to it's like you can't keep the same decorations up all year round. There might be some people, there are definitely some really incredible like Instagrammers whose whole lives are Halloween, and that like every single thing has Halloween on it, and the decor top to bottom is all Halloweened out, and I think that's amazing. I am somebody who loves a shiny object, so I have lots of different styles and tastes. I love old junk, so I've got a lot of vintage stuff, and I can't decorate in just one way or just one style. However, my love of horror and oddities and ghosts and goblins and strange things, all Halloween creatures, does definitely impact the way that I decorate. So I actually keep skulls up all year round because just growing up in the punk and metal scene, and that's kind of like, the decor for being a badass alt rocker. I should delete that. But yeah, so we're like, very into skulls for being bad kids. So skulls are definitely something that I keep up all year round. I do put pumpkins away because pumpkins feel very fall. And I keep anything black cats, I keep bats up. But anything that says Happy Halloween or is like very obviously like black and orange specifically, I do put away. I like to keep out things that feel spooky but don't necessarily scream Halloween, because then it makes it special next August when I start to pull out all of my decorations. I can get excited again, and I don't like wear any of my decorations out. So I would like to talk about other ways that we can celebrate throughout the year. Obviously, this podcast, but As I've mentioned in the past, I love ghost stories. I'm always looking into new ghost stories and history, as I've done on the podcast already and I'm doing on the Patreon. And I think that reading ghost stories and like reading them to friends is a really fun way to stay in that like excited spirit. Also trading urban legends back and forth. Like, by the time you're an adult, people tend to move around, the country a little bit. And a lot of my friends are from all over the place. And I love hearing about the urban legends from their hometowns. And you can have like a ghost story night or an urban legend night on Zoom where y'all just trade creepy stories with the lights off. And you'll definitely spook yourselves. And that'll have a nice Halloween vibe, especially because it's December now. We're in the Christmas time where ghost stories were traditional all through the Victorian times. So it's actually, you're celebrating two holidays at once. And then also as far as decorating, mistletoe is now associated with Christmas. But as I talked about in our Victorians episode, mistletoe used to be a Halloween decoration. So you can put mistletoe out this season and talk about the Halloween connections that it used to have. I would love to hear from other listeners what you do, how you keep the vibe going. I personally find a lot of comfort in following pagan rituals, like you mentioned, Shanti. And we do have the winter solstice or Yule coming up. And that might be a fun thing for listeners to get into. The other thing that's great about doing your own kind of personal ritual or witchcraft is that there's a lot of different candles involved and herbs and decor, and you can go as broad into it as you want. You can get really deep and specific. And I find that gives me sort of that special feeling of Halloween all year round. I've mentioned this on past episodes as well, but I really like learning the haunted history of buildings and neighborhoods in Los Angeles, which is where I live. But if you have any ghost tours in the city that you live in, I recommend checking those out. A lot of the ones around here are doing virtual tours now so that it's safe. But again, look up different haunted histories of your town or like the closest town to you and take yourself on a little tour. For me, getting scared is a big part of Halloween, and I watch horror movies all year round, but I do tend to get really burnt out on them after October ends. And I usually take a little break, but of course I don't totally ever want to abandon the weird and the strange. So I like to watch movies that have an odd quality to them, but maybe aren't like the slashers that I've been watching all October. So, anything by David Lynch or Robert Eggers have that kind of like unsettling, disquieting vibe that I really enjoy. Same thing with music. I kind of, pivot away from Elvira's monster rap and Amityville, and then I listen to things that still have kind of like a sad, dark, wintry quality to them, like The Cure or Susie and the Banshees. And you create like a whole sort of a moodiness, I guess I would say, that still feels like akin to the darkness of Halloween. And this is me personally, so I want to hear what everybody else does so we can create like a fun little quilt of post-Halloween experiences. I know once, Christmas happens, so like, of course, we've got Krampus and Gremlins and Nightmare Before Christmas and Silent Night, Deadly Night and Elves and all these really great horror slashers and fun family creepy horror Christmas films. So if horror specifically is your thing, there's still a lot that you can be doing this time of year. And I've seen a lot of people decorate Creepmas trees, all black Christmas trees with all horror or Halloween themed decorations, which I think is really fun. I personally have some Twilight Zone decorations and some Universal Monsters ornaments, for my tree. So I like to pepper my Christmas tree with kitsch So some stuff that's Halloween-y and horror, and then some that's just like oddities that I've collected throughout my life. But I would love to see people who are going all out for combining Christmas with horror and what other people are doing this time of year. So let's get into a conversation here. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you so much, Shanti. And I look forward to hearing how other listeners are going to inject Halloween into their everyday with this podcast by your side to help you. Next up, we have a call from one of our most dedicated and lovely listeners. Everybody, it's Jenny.
Hi, Luce. Thank you for sharing how you spent your Halloween 2020. And thanks to all the other listeners who are sharing as well. This is Jenny calling again. And I just wanted to share, I totally relate to you and others who have said, talked about how sometimes cramming all of the fun of Halloween into September and October can be stressful. I am totally that person. I want to do all the things. I have every weekend planned and booked. And of course, this year was different. Typically, one of my favorite nights of the whole entire year is a night in October where I gather as many of my friends as I can, and we go to one of the local haunted hay rides, and I just think it's so fun. I love being scared. I laugh, and I lose my voice usually from screaming and laughing. And I was really sad not to be able to do that this year, but instead, my husband and I took a weekend and drove to Sleepy Hollow 2 weeks before Halloween, where we had never been before. And it was really fun to go, and we visited the cemetery and the famous Headless Horseman Bridge. And near Sleepy Hollow, there's this great, wonderful thing that happens every year called the Great Jack-O-Lantern Blaze. I highly recommend it. We were able, they did it very safely this year for social distance. They limited the number of tickets they sold, and you had a time slot where you could come, and it's all outdoors. And there were thousands of jack-o'-lanterns carved and arranged in these really cool ways, and it was just, it was incredible. There's music that was composed specifically for this event that plays, and so as you go into different scenes, the music changes, and the whole thing was just incredible. I obviously was wearing a mask the entire time, but my jaw was open the whole time. So I highly recommend that if anybody ever has the opportunity to get out to Sleepy Hollow area during the Halloween season especially. It's beautiful, and the Great Jack-O-Lantern Blaze is so fantastic. On actual Halloween, I was able to visit a local historical cemetery, as one of the other listeners mentioned, and it was just a beautiful fall day. It was gorgeous. The leaves were amazing. And that night, I was invited to spend some time with a friend of ours, passing out candy to trick-or-treaters. I haven't lived in a place on my own where we've had trick-or-treaters, so my friends live in a neighborhood where they typically get tons, and they weren't really sure what it was going to be like this year. Trick-or-treating was allowed where they live, but they didn't anticipate getting a lot of trick-or-treaters. But so we went over and sat on their porch, and they had rigged up this tube so that we could slide candy down the tube, down from their porch, so that we could pass out candy but still be socially distanced. So it was really fun. They got actually a ton of trick-or-treaters, and the families, everybody was so appreciative that, so many houses on their street did something similar, so that, the kids that got out were able to still trick-or-treat and have fun. There were definitely fewer than in previous years, but I had a blast. I loved, my favorite was this little tiny child who was dressed up as Gizmo from Gremlins. And then there was also a man, I guess I don't know if it was a dad, but by himself, dressed as Freddy Krueger, pushing a stroller. It was amazing. So it was really great. It was different than a normal Halloween, but I was glad to see some friends. have a warm beverage, and sit outside under a cozy Halloween-themed blanket and pass out candy to trick-or-treaters. And then also to see the beautiful full moon that happens. So thanks again for everything that you do. Sorry that my message was so long. I love listening. Okay, bye-bye.
Jenny, it sounds like despite, COVID regulations, you still had a really lovely Halloween. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And I always appreciate your support and when you call in. So thank you for your enthusiasm and your continued contributions to the podcast. I have always wanted to go to Sleepy Hollow. I've never been. I think I was a little too old when I actually discovered it was a real place, and I freaked out when I was the only person who didn't know that it was a real place, because I loved the Disney Legend of Sleepy Hollow when I was a kid. And then when I got a little older, I got really obsessed with the Tim Burton, Johnny Depp version as well. So I think it's incredible that you got to go there. We have to put some pictures up on our Instagram because you shared some with me and it's absolutely gorgeous. So I think everybody should try to make a pilgrimage to Sleepy Hollow the next time it's safe to. The Great Jack-O-Lantern Blaze also sounds incredible, so thank you for that recommendation for next year. And I would love to hear more about this historical cemetery that you visited. We've had a number of callers now share what their favorite cemeteries were growing up going to cemeteries, so hit us with that name. I think it might be fun to create a chart of cemeteries, since we're getting some from all over the country right now. And then I don't know, maybe we can do a little tour when it's safe, and that way you are ooh, what are the cool cemeteries that other It's Always Halloween listeners love? That sounds fun to me. Those are the kinds of things I like to do to keep Halloween going all year round, visiting cemeteries, going on a tour of cemeteries across the country. Again, when it's safe to do so. Jenny, I also wanted to mention how you said your favorite thing to do usually is going on a haunted hayride, which is my favorite thing to do usually. Every Halloween, me and my boyfriend and our friends like to go to the LA Haunted Hayride, and I am obsessed with it. It's not the scariest thing out there, but it's very festive, and I really appreciate all of the artistry that goes into it. And I just really miss going to haunted houses in general. I get so much out of the screaming, and you said the laughing. I'm that person too. I'm screaming the loudest, and then I'm cackling my head off until I'm screaming again. And it honestly feels like therapy. When I walk out of a haunted house, I get this high. It's probably a lack of oxygen. I feel like I'm walking on air. I just feel so light. And it made me realize that we probably should be screaming a lot more. So maybe that's a way that we can also celebrate Halloween, is to just scream for a while and get out everything that's been building up all year. If you're close with your neighbors, maybe let them know. I live in an apartment building, so maybe I would give a heads up before a screaming marathon, just so they don't call any services on me. But I think it would feel really good. We need to do a collective It's Always Halloween scream. Set a day, we'll all go out on our balconies and just scream into the air together. Let me know what you think of that idea. Okay, now we've got a short and sweet little EEEEKmail from Tony. Hello, Luce. I hope you're having a spooky day. I am, Tony. Thank you. I've been listening to the podcast since it started, and I absolutely love it. I wanted to suggest a couple of names for us, the audience. And his two names are Pumpkinheads and Trick-or-Treaters. Take care and stay spooky, Tony. Why, Tony, you are a delight. Thank you so much for chiming in, for listening since the beginning. I am desperate to find y'all a fun and catchy name, because I just keep saying It's Always Halloween listeners, which It's Always Halloween, great name for a podcast, does not roll off the tongue to keep saying in regards to a lovely community. So we have been going back and forth with these names for the last month. I really like Pumpkinheads. I think it's super cute. I do want to share that my family dog's name was Pumpkin. And so when I say the phrase Pumpkinheads, I sort of think of all of y'all with little Chihuahua heads, which I don't totally have a problem with. But I think Pumpkinheads is really cute. And Trick-or-Treaters is also very cute. My little treats, I guess that's too sensual sounding. Maybe not, maybe not shorten it. I'll just say my little Trick-or-Treaters. My sweets. So just to summarize, we had another awesome listener, Laura, who had written in before, who suggested Sawa Nights, which I also like, but I do, again, it sounds a little like sodomites, so I'm not sure, but I really love where it's coming from. And then we'd also talked about Boo Crew, but then a listener let me know that already belongs to another podcast. And then I was thinking about my booze for a while, but then a little more thinking on that made me realize that is AAVE, African American Vernacular English. And I don't feel totally comfortable using the word boo in that way with that context, with that in mind as a white woman host. So let's keep thinking on it. I would love for people to vote and weigh in on what they think of Pumpkinheads, Trick-or-Treaters, Sawa Nights. And I am just so grateful for everyone that has been suggesting things. All your ideas are good, and we'll just together come up with one that feels great. You know, we can't all quickly shout out something from The Simpsons and have it be an international phenomena. I wish we could, but we can't. So we'll come to it. Thanks so much, Tony, and I am happy to have you here, and I'm happy for your suggestions. Up next, we have a phone call about food. We love those Halloween snack calls. Keep them coming.
Hello. I was reading something this evening and came across a recipe, the name of which I had heard before. And made me curious about foods, perhaps, that people like to eat on Halloween. We always know about party favors like pretzels made into witches' fingers or hot dogs that look like bloody fingers and peeled grapes for eyeballs and things like that. However, these are, I believe, Scottish in origin and nothing that I have ever heard of in the States. And they are called fly cemeteries. Fly cemeteries. So I'm wondering, have you ever heard of that particular pastry? And if you have, would you be willing to share a recipe? Anyhow, it's just something I thought might be fun. See what you think, Luce. Goodbye.
I have never heard of fly cemeteries before, and I had to look it up, and I'm absolutely obsessed with this, and it's definitely something I want to make, and I would love to hear if other listeners know about fly cemeteries. So I looked it up, and we do have this. So I'm getting too excited. So this is from Scotland. It seems to originate in Scotland. And I tried to find like the origin, like way back, find the history. And I couldn't find any history about fly graveyard, fly cemeteries, and maybe when they started. So if we have any food experts out there, or anybody in the UK who knows a little bit about the history of flies graveyards, I would love to hear about it. Let us know. So so it's from Scotland, where they're known as fly graveyards, fly cemeteries, fly cakes, or also, I guess, for people who don't want to bring up the word flies, they say fruit slices or fruit squares. And it looks like they are also something that is popular in New Zealand, which I think is really fun. And in Ireland, it seems they just call them currant squares, which that name isn't as exciting. And I would love to hear from any of our British Isles listeners out there who make these. I pulled up a recipe from a very cute sounding website called bakingwithgranny.co.uk. And this is a blog by Amy, who says that these are all of her recipes that are from her grandmother, which I thought was very sweet since we've talked about how much we love our grandparents on this podcast before. So I just want to read from the blog because I think it is cute and I love Amy's writing here. So she says, there's something about us Scots and our love of questionable food. Haggis is the obvious one. I love it. Lorne sausage, macaroni pies, deep-fried Mars bars, and even imbrew cupcakes. Scotland is famed for its love of unique foods, and it could only be the Scots who would come up with a pet name such as Fly Cemetery for a sweet little pastry treat like fruit slice. Ever so simple and a lot more tasty than its pet name may suggest, fruit slice is a melt-in-the-mouth short crust pastry treat loaded with currants and lashings of sugar. It got its pet name from its appearance rather than its flavor. Not for the weak-stomached, it's simply because of the currants' resemblance to, well, lots of dead flies. Our granny can even recall when her own papa would pick out the currants and joke that they were delicious little flies. Yum! I was quite surprised just how many people were chuffed to receive a piece of fruit slice when I made it recently. Not a huge fan of currants myself, I was unsure of how many people would be happy to take some off my hands, but it turns out there's already been requests for another batch. Well, Amy, you are a delight. I love the word chuffed, and I am excited to share this recipe with everybody. So I will post this on the Instagram, on the Patreon, and make sure everybody gets it. It looks like a lot of butter, sugar, flour, eggs, which I think all of this really, since I know we've got Spooky Vegan and Color Me Courtney and myself included, many Halloween vegans in the house. So it looks like you could definitely dip this and make it vegan as well if you like. So thank you, caller. I really appreciate this idea. And, going back to Lindsay's EEEEKmail and Shanti's call, how great is cooking for keeping in the Halloween spirit? And I really love, we've talked about pots of chili and apple pies and different things that we make around Halloween that we enjoy eating, but we haven't talked very much about novelty foods. So I really appreciate that you brought up the witch's fingers and the grape eyeballs, and I really like the novelty aspect of making foods for Halloween. So this is very cool. I look forward to hearing from anyone who's made these before, and I look forward to sharing the recipe with everybody. Thank you so much for the idea. Up next, we're visiting the EEEEKmail bag, and we've got an urban legend. Hi, Luce. I've got an urban legend you might like. My university, specifically Bernard College in Erie, Pennsylvania, is built on land gifted to the university by a farming family. That family had a dog named Bruno. A portrait of Bruno hangs in the university dining hall, but the spooky urban legend part is that Bruno is buried on campus at an event space called the Wilson Picnic Grove. Supposedly, if you are at the picnic grove at night, you can hear Bruno's ghostly barking in the distance as he barks to scare you away from stepping on his grave. Students sometimes go there at midnight, especially on Halloween, and the time I was there was indeed some distant barking. Was it a living pet in some distant house, howling at the moon? Skeptics may think so, but I think it was Bruno, warning me away from treading on his unmarked grave. Hope you enjoyed that. Love the show. Chris. Chris, I enjoyed that quite a bit. We have not had any haunted animal stories on this podcast. So thank you for breaking the seal on that. And I love the idea of ghostly barking. I agree with you. I think it was definitely Bruno. I would love to hear, keep the urban legends coming. Engineer Pete gave us a great one a couple of weeks ago. I love ones having to do with college. I was trying to think after reading yours. I went to Bowling Green State University in Northwest Ohio, and I was trying to think if we had any urban legends, but I feel like everything was like superstitions around sports, like don't do this or the Falcons will lose. I can't think of any specific urban legends having to do with our campus, although we did have a cemetery on our campus, which I would walk through between classes. So that was pretty exciting. So listeners, call in with your hometown urban legends or your college ghost stories or your haunted animal tales. We would love to hear them. Speaking of which, our next and final call is about cemeteries.
Hi, Luce. It's Trista. I'm excited to be calling in for the first time. I was really inspired by your talk about cemeteries, and Courtney's calling in and talking about her experience with visiting cemeteries. Hi, Courtney. I follow you on Instagram. I think we're both in the Dallas area, which is kind of fun. I have not visited the cemetery that Courtney brought up, but I do visit a lot of cemeteries. Every time I travel, of course, pre-pandemic, I always go and look up whatever cemetery is in the city that I'm traveling to. I want to know, is there a historical cemetery there? Are there people of notoriety buried there? I love to visit big, beautiful cemeteries with lots of flowers and parks. My favorite one is Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, where I'm from. I love to go there whenever I am able to go home and visit my family. They do all kinds of events there. There's beautiful magnolias. They do tours and classes, and it's just kind of a fun, beautiful place to visit. But like you, Luce, I think we may have talked about this before. I also grew up with playing in a cemetery when I was younger. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Lodi, and my backyard for many years of my life butted up against a cemetery called the Woodlawn Cemetery in Lodi. And it was literally my backyard. I would go wander off there and play, and my friends would go play in the graveyard with me, and we would go collect sticks and acorns, and we would sometimes gather pennies and stones that we had found on tombstones, unbeknownst to us why they were put there by those people's loved ones, thinking like, oh, how odd that somebody had left change and money on gravestones, and we would just take it. I've since tried to make amends to those ghosts and those people I have taken their change from. Hopefully they forgive my childhood ignorance. I grew up with a cemetery in my backyard, and I too, like you, would go back there and play. I learned to ride my bike back there. We would take walks as families. There was a time in my life I thought that the Easter Bunny lived in the cemetery behind the rocks. I was a weird kid. But it was a beautiful cemetery and is known for these kind of rhododendron bushes that were planted, I think, over 100 years ago. So my greatest memories of this cemetery are actually in the spring when these bushes would bloom and they would be huge and take over the graves and the mausoleums. And I would just go play among these beautiful flowers and all these tombstones as a child. And it was just a beautiful place. And I've never thought of cemeteries as scary. I find them to be very peaceful and beautiful and a great place to visit. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say. I'm so happy to have this podcast in my life, and I'm excited that, this is my first call. Can you tell I'm nervous? I don't know what to say, so I'm just going to hang up. Love what you're doing. Bye.
Trista, thank you so much for those beautiful memories. I love that you also grew up outside of a cemetery like I did as well. And thank you for telling us about the cemeteries that you have fond memories of. I'm going to start the cemetery map, the It's Always Halloween cemetery map, so we can all visit each other's cemeteries. And then I just want to add that you did a lovely job, so don't worry about being nervous. A lot of listeners and writers, contributors tell me that they're too nervous to call in or they don't know if their message was good. Y'all are doing great, and you have created such a fun community here around the podcast. So don't second guess yourself. You're doing good, and everybody is enjoying your contributions. Also, Trista has a very cool candle shop online. You should check out on Instagram. It's Marvel and Moon, and I've been tagging her in some Instagram stories. But, this holiday season, I think it would be awesome if we could all support each other. So if there's any other makers out there in the It's Always Halloween community, please let me know. Hit me up so that we can share your shops online and let people know about it. So if you want to check out Trista's artisan candles, which I absolutely love, and they have little bits of everything. Honestly, she has ones with apple, ones with pumpkin, different types of stones, rose petals. They're just really beautiful candles. So if you're on Instagram, her handle is @marvelandmoon, or you can go to marvelandmoon.com. Listeners, let me know what shops you have that we can all support you on this holiday season. And then I also want to thank Trista for being a member of Patreon. It's the beginning of the month, so I'm doing a little quick segue here to thank all of my Patreon supporters. We've got 6 members on the new Patreon, so thank you so much. Trista Edwards, Beverly Richmond, Aaron McGee, Elisa Marcus, Isabel O'Hare, and Isaac McDaniel. So all 6 of you are helping contribute to 2 of these small Frights episodes a month. So thank you so much for that contribution. And if you want to sign up for the Patreon, it's patreon.com/itsalwayshalloween. And the lowest level starts at $3. And at every level, you will get a shout out on the podcast for supporting. And we also have movie nights, newsletters, ghost stories, and more. So check us out over there. Let me know if you have any questions. I pay Pete to do the sound and do all the music and everything for the podcast. So it takes about $500 a month to make this podcast. It's totally out of my pocket. So my first goal on Patreon is to raise $500 to cover the costs of making the podcast every month. And then from there, I'll be able to do more and more things and push out more aspects. I really want to do interviews with historians and experts in different areas. I would love to be able to do, live shows eventually as well. I have lots of ideas. Please hit me up with more things that, you're looking for from the podcast or things that you might enjoy as other Patreon tiers. This is the first time that I've used it as a host. I've supported other people on Patreon, but I haven't had my own yet. So I'm still figuring it out. And as always, I love people's suggestions and ideas. So hit me up, let me know. You can also follow us on Instagram at It's Always Halloween Podcast. And again, give us a call on the All Hallows Hotline at 802-532-DEAD. Or drop us a line in the EEEEKmail. It's always Halloween Podcast at gmail.com. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review and write us a little review as well. That really helps so much. It's something free that you can do that helps promote the podcast, as it messes with the almighty algorithm that none of us totally understand. So please hit us up on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on NPR One. It's Always Halloween is researched, written, and performed by me, Luce Tomlin-Brenner, and the editing, theme music, and sound design is by the marvelous Pete Burns. Thank you so much, Pete. You can follow me personally on Instagram and Twitter at LTBcomedy and Pete at Mittenberries. Thank you so much for listening to It's Always Halloween, and come back next time unless you're too busy strolling through our nation's beautiful cemeteries.